Okay, I think we'll get going. Welcome everybody to the Gowling WLG Annual Spring Construction Law Forum. My name is Ted Betts. I'm a partner in the Gowling WLG Toronto office and the head of our Infrastructure and Construction Sector Group. We have been hosting this forum for over a decade now in order to share insights and updates on construction laws and best practices and trends in the industry. We always follow a similar format by starting with some brief updates on recent case law development in construction and key legislative changes across the country. We then follow with a current trends piece and practices segment. This year, we will be focusing on everybody's favorite topic, tariffs and trade and their impacts on construction projects in Canada. Our aim is always to provide in-house counsel, project managers, and other construction parties and advisors with practical tips and useful information that can help you in the day-to-day of your construction projects. Before we get going, I would like to make a land acknowledgement. We could advance the slide, Shannon. As I am in the city of Toronto, I will acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. During our program, we will have a lot of content. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. We will endeavor to get back to you immediately during the course of the program, or at least before the end. Our program is being recorded, and so we do hope to answer all questions in due course if we don't get to them during the program today. The video of the program will be available afterwards in the next few days after the program is completed. As always, we endeavor to deliver our program on time and on budget. And so with that, I will pass the microphone over to Sahil Shore, who will give us some legal updates. Sahil?
Thank you, Ted, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sahil Shore. I'm a partner here at the Gowling WLG. Me and my colleague, Tristan Neal, we are going to speak with you this afternoon about a recent Ontario Superior Court decision in Walsh Construction versus TTC. This decision was released approximately a year ago, and there are a number of reasons why this decision is very important to our sector. Next slide, please. We're going to talk to you about the decision, but at the same time, if the decision is of interest and has an application to a case that you may be working on, we ask that you speak to your legal counsel. Next slide, please. So at a very high level, as most of you would be aware, that large construction disputes are regularly resolved privately through either contractually mandated or subsequently agreed upon processes, which may include arbitration, dispute boards, mediation, and even structured negotiations. However, due to the increased use of such processes, it has become less common for courts to be presented with complex delay and disruption claims, meaning that there have been limited opportunities for the court to offer new guidance on how such claims are viewed from the bench. That was not the case in Walsh versus TTC, because the case, as we are going to walk you through, dealt with a number of different issues and provided a number of valuable takeaways for the construction industry and the construction law practitioners, including counsels and arbitrators. So at a very high level, the parties are Walsh Construction and TTC. The project in question is Pioneer Village Station, and the contract details are what I show you on the slide. The reason why this case is so important is because it deals with a number of issues which are regularly found in complex construction disputes. Next slide, please. So some of the claims, which this project in particular and everything that went to court included design issues, allegations of excessive scope changes, expert schedule and quantum analysis, flow through of subcontractor claims, liquidated damages, and allegations of contract misadministration, among many, many other issues. The decision from the Superior Court of Justice is nearly 850 paragraphs. However, we are only going to speak to you on two issues. One is delay and a sub-issue pertaining to delay, as i.e. expert evidence. And the second issue that we're going to speak with you is about flow-through subcontract claims. Next slides, please. So this is the project and the litigation timeline, but you will get the slide deck. But what I want to give you context is, what did this case involve when it went to hearing? It had 161 trial days. It consisted of 1 day of site visit. It included 4 days of opening submissions, 151 days of evidence, and 5 days of closing submissions. It had over 50 witnesses. Over 1,400 additional exhibits were marked during the course of the trial, and the written closing submissions were thousands of pages long. It should not come as a surprise, given the complexity of the claims that are involved and the court's reasoning. The matter is actually headed to an appeal. TTC has appealed the decision, Walsh has appealed the decision, and TTC has cross-appealed the decision, and it is scheduled for a hearing sometime this fall. So with that, could we go to the next slide, please? And so this are the two issues that we're going to speak about. Over to my colleague, Tristan Neal, to speak about delay analysis.
And if we could advance to slide 11, please. This is where we really get into the details of the, one more slide, I think. Yes, this is where we get into the real details of the important and interesting elements of the delay findings by the court that I'm going to discuss today. Certainly, as Sahil mentioned, the court's decision was lengthy. The delay was lengthy too, and it was involving numerous issues that are addressed in detail in the decision. The slides contain some high-level overview of the most important causes of delay, but I really want to talk about the key item from the judge's decision, which relates to the delay analysis and the expert evidence that was presented at the trial. And so we have Walsh, the contractor, presenting a full-time impact assessment. Walsh hired an expert to do so, and the expert presented at the trial, and the expert's opinion was that there were 1,047 compensable days of delay. The TTC made a strategic decision. It decided to criticize the evidence of Walsh's expert, but not to put forward its own full critical path assessment for the project as an alternative to that put forward by Walsh. So TTC says it's only responsible for 411 days, but it arrives at that figure by critiquing Walsh's report rather than presenting a full critical path analysis of its own. And the court does something interesting. The court says that given the nature of the evidence presented, it is forced into the position of accepting either the 1,047-day position put forward by Walsh, or accepting the 411-day position put forward by the TTC. It was not open to the court, in the court's view, to consider and apportion the delay in different ways, which is something that we would more typically see if both parties had put forward competing critical path analyses. And so this was an incredibly important feature of how the judge made the decision. And if we advance to the next slide, we will see that in this situation, expert credibility took on a very important role because the court had to decide in total which expert's evidence it preferred, and essentially that is what carried the day. And so in this case, the court found that Walsh's expert was reliable and credible. There was some concern raised by the TTC that Walsh's expert had been retained by Walsh on numerous earlier occasions, that the expert had had some involvement with Walsh during the course of the project, but the court said no, those earlier retainers were not a concern. This witness has demonstrated that the evidence was independent and met the requirements of the expert's duties to the court, and found that expert to be reliable and credible. On the other hand, the court found the TTC's expert to be less reliable and credible, and found that that expert verged into advocacy and at times acted as a dogmatic, difficult, defensive witness. And so on the next slide, we will see that this really sealed the outcome for Walsh and the TTC, given that the court found, based on the nature of the evidence presented, that it had a binary choice between a total win for Walsh or a total win for the TTC on the element of delay days. And given the court's finding that Walsh's expert was more credible than the TTC's expert, Walsh carried the day on the delay analysis. And so in terms of the takeaways on the delay piece, number one, if you're responding to a delay claim, it is very risky not to put forward in evidence a full critical path analysis as an alternative to that put forward by the party bringing the delay claim. And number two, expert credibility matters. The expert delay witness has a tremendous role to play in these delay claims, and so that witnesses' credibility is incredibly important. And now Sahil has returned to speak about the subcontractor flow-through claims.
Thank you, Tristan. If we go to the next slide, please. Number 16, please. Thank you. So it should not come as a surprise that the court rejected Walsh's flow-through claims. And among other things, this is one of the key pieces that is being appealed by Walsh to the appeal court. So the reason the court rejected the flow-through claims is as I have outlined on the slide, based on two types of agreements that Walsh had entered into with the subcontractors. Next slide, please. And primarily, the court made a finding that a general contractor cannot seek to recover amounts from an owner that it has no obligation to pay. And the reason being, Walsh had obtained full releases from its subcontractor and was no longer liable to pay those amounts. But in taking a step back, the result pertaining to the flow-through claims is more challenging insofar as it arguably creates a tension between the existing case law and the practicalities of managing large claims on infrastructure projects. And what I mean by that is that the practicalities of large delay claims frequently dictate a different approach, particularly where the contractor is faced with dozens of subcontractor claims and the prospect of managing a tsunami of subcontractor litigation. while at the same time attempting to motivate the subcontractors to finish the project. And in such circumstances, it is not uncommon for the contractor to resolve the subcontractor claims and then take an assignment of those claims in order to streamline the overall litigation and put some funds into the pockets of the subcontractors, notwithstanding that the payment still remains disputed between the owner and the subcontractor. And the reason I say that is such steps taken by the contractors can be beneficial to both the contractor and the owner, given that they can potentially avoid even significantly large lien actions or other messy multi-party dispute. And just on this point, I also want to bring in the context of very large claims and the time it takes to resolve them. If we just take Walsh as an example, the action, not the project, the action in itself was commenced in 2017, 7 years before the judgment was rendered. It is entirely possible that in cases where small subcontractors are involved, that 7 years of non-payment could seriously impact their ability to carry on business. And I believe one of the things that the divisional court will have to address during the hearing is, while this case in itself does not fall within the new construction lien regime, it's certainly one of the key purposes of the Construction Act now is to ensure the flow of funds during the construction pyramid to the subtrades, suppliers, and so forth. Accordingly, in my view, it would seem that Walsh exposes a fundamental tension between the first principles of contractual viability in relation to the flowing through of the subcontractor claims and the first principles of the Construction Act. So right now, the issue of flowing through subcontractor claims is a challenging one with no clear answer at present, but I invite you to stay tuned as we give you further updates after the appeal decision is rendered by the divisional court. So with that, over to Ted.
Before we move on to the trend segment of the program, as many of you are aware, construction law reforms continue across the country. In the last year or so, the federal government, the provinces of Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia have all adopted prompt payment and adjudication to align with Ontario and Alberta. Alberta is also in the process of amending its own prompt payment and adjudication legislation, in particular by making it applicable to public government projects through amendments to the Public Works Act. In Ontario, we also passed several significant amendments to the Construction Act, including some significant changes coming for the treatment of holdback. These have received royal assent in Ontario, but are not yet effective as regulations dealing with adjudication procedures are still being worked on. We expect that to come forward and be effective in the fall. We plan to dive in more deeply into these amendments, both in Ontario and across the country, at our annual Fall Construction Law Forum in November. In the meantime, look out for updates on our Building Brief publication. And if you're not subscribed for that, please feel free to follow up on our website to subscribe and stay current with all of our updates. So with that, we will move on now to the, as I said, our favorite subject of the day these days. Tariffs and the cost of building. What's at stake for Canadian construction and infrastructure? I'm not going to go through everything that's happened. We like to say around this time of the year in Canada, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute. It's almost the same with trade and tariff policies. If you don't like the tariffs being applied today, wait an afternoon. We've had a lot of turbulence. There's been tariffs imposed, tariffs taken off, tariffs paused, tariffs increased. Is it part of a negotiation strategy? Is it part of a fundamental restructuring of trade paths and trade arrangements globally for the US? These are some of the subjects we're going to try to address today, but in particular with a prism of how these impact our construction projects here in Canada. I want to focus on two concepts with the trades so that we have the same idea and framework. If you could advance the slide, Shannon. So obviously, when goods go from Canada to the US or cross the border into Canada, that's where tariffs are applied. These are a tax on imports by the importing country. So goods coming into Canada that are going to be used on a construction project, the tariffs on those, the cost increase as a result of the tariffs, is on goods coming imposed by our Canadian government. Those are direct impacts of the export of the goods that are coming into Canada, and those are fairly straightforward because you can, there's a complicated process at the border if you've ever had to deal with customs, but it's a clear line item. You've got a good, it has a specific tariff attached to it, and that's the increased price that you have to pay ultimately to the owner, or deal with on your project. There's also indirect impacts, and this is something that's often lost and it's very complicated to track. And so when we talk about indirect impacts, we're talking about goods that go into the US and then come out of the US to Canada. So they're taxed. There's a tariff on the good coming into the United States, and then maybe HVAC equipment would be a good example. Includes steel and aluminum. That is taxed going into the United States. There's currently no tax or tariff on HVAC equipment coming from the United States to Canada. So but the price of that good has increased because of tariffs and this trade turbulence. In fact, the biggest impact of all of this is less the actual amount of the tariffs and the disruption and the turbulence and uncertainty. And so those are some of the things we're going to talk about, but we wanted to highlight some of those high-level impacts. The longer-term impacts, we could, are many and varied, and we'll get into some of these, but, there's inflation on the cost of project. It could result in slow walking or suspension or even cancellation of projects. Capital is following where the easy money is and the return, this more certain returns on capital. Obviously, it has the potential to reduce competitiveness or profitability of Canadian companies who are working globally. We've all seen already the supply chain disruptions and uncertainty and the impacts on the dollar, although right now it looks positive on the dollar because the US dollar has been sinking a fair bit. There's lots of things that we've been advising clients to do. We will touch on some of these during our presentation and a panel discussion that will follow. But everybody by now has scrambled to look at how their contract currently deals with tariffs. And if you're starting a new contract, making sure that it has the right clauses to deal with it one way or the other, trying to deal with it clearly. When we're allowing price increases because of tariffs or the claims for contract price increases as a result of tariffs, how do we verify that? That's an important thing to clarify in your contract, or at least have an understanding between trade owners and general contractors about what level of proof do you need and traceability do you need to verify that tariffs have actually impacted the price that you're charging. This is causing an inflation across the board, and so we have to wonder if our indexes are actually reflective. There's very good and detailed and narrow Stats Canada indexes that track price increases. Are they accurate and reflective of reality? Next slide, Shannon. We won't go into the detail of this, but bear in mind that even within the existing tariff structure, there are lots of relief measures that are available to parties. It's a very complicated classification regime. Your goods could be classified improperly. They could be valued improperly. There's mechanisms to try to avoid double and triple and quadruple tariffs on tariffs on tariffs. And it's a complicated regime, but those still exist, and even in this tariff turbulent times. important in your procurements to bear in mind that you want to have and make sure you are all bidding to the same rules and same price regime and same contract. So if you are a general contractor trying to get a trade on board or an owner trying to hire a contractor, make it clear how you want those tariffs that are in place right now to be dealt with and how they will be dealt with if they change, so that you're comparing apples to apples when you get those bid prices in. We're stuck now at trying to figure out whether our financial models and assumptions on how the costs will progress on a project over time, and how they work, how good they are. But it needs to be stress tested. We see all over the place now, and we'll talk a lot about this coming up. New relationships, reconsidering alternative suppliers in our supply chain, and what are the longer term costs to budgeting for the operations once this is built, because those are going up as well. There's a lot going on. We have created a tariffs hub on our website. The link is on the screen. Feel free to go back there. There's lots of articles. We're talking about construction here. Of course, this is impacting all sorts of other things as well, employment and other industries and other parts of our economy. We've got lots of articles and resources on all of that there on our website. So that's my quick, brief presentation. I'll introduce you now to John Penner of Strategy Corp to introduce himself and talk a little bit more from a economy, market, government perspective, advisory perspective on what they are seeing. John, welcome. Glad to have you, and give us a little bit of introduction on yourself and Strategy Corp and the good work it does for its clients.
Great. Thank you, Ted. So my name is John Penner. I'm a principal at Strategy Corp. We do management consulting, communications, and government relations work. I am joined by my colleague Bruce Fisher, who is from the other side of the border, though is living in Canada right now, and has worked in U.S. politics for most of his life and can provide the context of what is happening in the U.S., which is just as important. And I previously was 10 years in the federal government working on many trade issues at different times. If we go to the next slide, we're going to keep our presentation and short and to the point. First, we'll just start with a quick situational analysis, followed based on the domestic U.S. and international scene, followed by what to expect on the negotiation points between the different countries. And then very briefly, just on the construction impacts, others can speak closer to the specifics, but we'll just talk about what are the risks and opportunities more broadly. With that, to the next slide, I'll turn it over to Bruce, who can start talking on the US, and then I will follow up on the Canadian side. Bruce.
I'm going to beg your indulgence, and John, you're going to have to cover for me unless everybody wants to hear this fire alarm going off, which is not a planned event.
It's not, we can't hear it, so you're good. Good.
Oh, good. Good. Okay, great. Great. I hope you can hear me. Great. The bad news of the morning after my conversations with folks who are watching the docket of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, which is where the major tariff-related cases, the challenges to the Trump administration are happening, is that there will be a 30-day broad strokes agreement between Canada and the United States long before there is a specific resolution to the cases that are on the docket. The docket doesn't even specify that this the critical case is going to pop up until July 31st. Everybody's very frustrated with this. The plaintiffs have asked for emergency intervention by the United States Supreme Court. No one knows whether the United States Supreme Court is going to weigh in on this or whether they're going to let the usual sequence of events happen. District Court Court of Appeals and none to the Supreme Court. I and everybody else I talk to expects the latter. So the conversation also then turns to what is the Trump administration's goal? And the Trump administration's goal seems to be back to status quo ante. As he was leaving Canada, he once again mentioned 51st state. He once again mentioned um, he didn't say Section 899, but what he's talking about is the tax proposal that's in the Great Big Beautiful Bill. The Senate has not substantively changed that. I know that the Trump administration wants to use every lever that it can to get rid of the what is your acronym for it? The Internet Services Tax, John?
T.
Yes. So that is probably going to remain in the bill in some form or another. If not, the Trump administration will probably unilaterally act as the Secretary of the Treasury is empowered to do. So what we've experienced today, what disruptions you've experienced today, what cost increases you've experienced today, I am here to tell you that until such time as there is a new way of operating in the Trump administration, which is willing to ignore the Kuzma, which is willing to ignore or delay implementation of court findings, we are in the situation that we are going to be in for a good long time. That's as succinct and blunt as I can put it. Sorry, there's not better news. Sorry, there's not a good negotiating partner. They want what they want, and the boss keeps telling them. And when I say them, I mean the entire House of Representatives, the entire United States Senate. Okay, the judiciary has not effectively pushed back on them. And though I'm delighted to have seen that the five premiers went to Boston yesterday to meet with five governors, state governors, and premiers who understand the cross-border economic integration. They are powerless to thwart the Trump administration's goal. So,
Right. Okay, thanks, Bruce. So with that rosy news on the US front, perhaps we can talk to the Canadian side. And I think you can notice numerous items happening in parallel from the Canadian administration, which is very interesting. So one, everyone's obviously focused on what's happening with the US, but really what is happening in from a national unity perspective and then the broader trade relationships globally is also very important. So what you see is that Carney, the prime minister, has on the domestic front is dealing with a very strong national unity crisis with the West versus the East, and this is impacting the negotiations and also how you work with China. So, for example, in the agricultural sector, you obviously have the supply management in Quebec, but then you have a strong trading relationship with the U.S. and with the Chinese on pulses, pork, and other agricultural products. And Premier Mo sent a letter to the Prime Minister basically saying, do not make sure you fix the China relationship. And anyway, I don't know if it's only me, but the slides seem to be jumping everywhere. I'm sorry, I'm not controlling them. Anyways, what we have there is then you have Carney reaching out to China and to India, and obviously Modi from India came to the G7, trying to repair relationships that had been burned in the last administration. And also you can see it even in the speech from the throne with the king presenting and his discussions across Europe. So there's a broad kind of broadening out of our position in the world through Carney to counteract the challenge that is being taken place by the U.S. On the U.S., as was mentioned, is they agreed, Trump and Carney agreed that they will do a 30-day negotiation. That 30-day negotiation is not going to be a renegotiated CUSMA. That will be an agreement in principle between the parties. You can't possibly get through the technical details of CUSMA in that time. But it'll be top-level discussions, and it is literally Carney and Trump talking on the phone and text messaging on between them on this issue. It is a incredibly tight circle around Carney on this, with Dominic LeBlanc and him discussing with the U.S. government. This means that it's basically where Trump likes to do stuff, which is deal making between different parties. And Carney's background from Goldman Sachs and others, this is something he's pretty comfortable with as well, which takes out the technocratic element, which will have to be dealt with after. Now, the big thing on we think of always the tariffs as the economic aspect, but the more important is a security aspect, which is that until you can get to the economic aspect, you're going to have to get through security. And that security question is obviously 2% target, which Carney said they are going to meet this year through a variety of mechanisms. You're going to have what is called the first right of refusal on critical minerals is going to be a discussion, and then also Arctic security. Once you get through the security discussion, you can then get into the negotiation points on the economic side, which is probably the next slide. If you go to the next slide, the negotiating points on that are very much on the steel and aluminum, as constantly been a item for Trump, which is and then also on the digital sales tax, services tax, the DST, which has taken up a lot of oxygen from the tech industry. And I would suppose, my supposition would be, and from some intel, is that this is an easy give for the administration versus some other more politically sensitive matters around supply management and agriculture, which would be very hard politically to get through. The DST is relatively new, and it has very few to zero votes attached to any movement on that front. The U.S. is obviously asking to do items on China in their continued battle on China, and a lot of speculation on most of this trade war is really around that. This is going to be a really hard one for Carney to provide because, as per Premier Mo and also British Columbia and others, their markets are the China market for their agricultural products and others, and as well as just the consumer goods aspect for Canadians. So there can only be so much movement on China, and they've already started renegotiations with the Chinese to get that relationship back on place. We've talked about HST in terms of services, supply management, agriculture, and market and manufacturing. Obviously, continue to be strong challenges that will be discussed between the two leaders directly with their constituencies. And these constituencies in both countries are important economically, but more importantly, politically. Right, that is ultimately the political value of these constituencies trumps even any kind of economic might they have in their own sense. So on the construction side, if we go to the next slide, just very briefly just say and we'll get into it in the actual panel, and I know there are those who can speak far greater to the impacts, but one item which is very interesting is that if the Prime Minister decides to finds an agreement with the U.S. that normalizes the relationship on trade and is basically helps us with the U.S. inputs, what happens in that negotiation as it relates to China, as many goods in the sector can come from China as well, and whether we have to do anything on that front. And then, as per any kind of uncertainty, it's less how much it costs now and more on what it could possibly cost in the future. And as Ted says, the weather changing as I look out my window with the massive amount of rain, that could happen very quickly in this discussion as well. I'll turn it over to Ted to talk about the panel.
Great, thank you. And just before we go, we did have one question from, I think it's David Zerwell, my friend David Zerwell. Is a change in congressional leadership during the midterms the earliest opportunity for there to be a potential for Congress to attempt to compel the administration to respect court rulings on issues of trade and tariffs and so on? I don't know if, Bruce, you want to come back on to answer that?
The answer to that question is, will the Trump administration, am I unmuted here?
No, you're good.
You're good.
Okay. Will the Trump administration respect instruction from the Court of Appeals? And if not, will it respect instruction from the Supreme Court? Because the Supreme Court is being given a binary, when the case, uh, uh, when the specific case, Learning Resources Incorporated versus Trump, gets to the Supreme Court. It's a binary question. Yes, the president has to respect limits, or no, the court will let it slide. So I don't think we have to wait for the 2026 elections, which means waiting until a new Congress is seated in 2027. It'll happen before then.
Great, thank you. So thank you, John. Thank you, Bruce. Obviously, one of Canada's leading strategic advisory services company. Feel free to follow up with John or Bruce if you have any further follow-up questions or want to engage them in some assistance with your tariff or any other matter that they deal with in government relations or public relations.
We're working with a lot of sectors on a lot of questions and on these issues, so we can definitely be of help to any who have any needs on the sector.
So thank you both. We're going to now turn to our panel discussion. So I'll invite the panelists to join us. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the issues with people who are dealing with it live, day to day, on their desk, in ways that will hopefully help inform us on strategies, challenges that we're facing, common across the industry, and how different experts and experienced people are dealing with them. So I'd like to introduce our panel. You've met John now. Daniel Botero is the Vice President Major Projects at Amoco. Welcome, Daniel. Kim Valliere, if you've been to any of our forums, you might have seen Kim before. She's the Vice President Development Construction at RioCan and has spoken with us before. So welcome, Kim. And last but certainly not least, Scott Anderson, the CEO of Ontario Home Builders Association. So we've got a great panel with a lot of different perspectives and experiences: owner, contractor, industry association rep, strategic advisory, and public relations views. So with that, we'll get right into kind of an open question to kick it off. How are tariffs currently impacting your own project costs, and in your experience, or for Scott, your members, what are you hearing? Maybe start with Daniel and go to Kim and then Scott.
Thank you, Ted. Well, it's a bit early in the process, and given the volatility of in and out and uncertainty, the only certain tariffs applied on steel and aluminum, but not yet hitting the products that are built with those materials coming back to Canada. At least we haven't seen in our infrastructure projects that impact. Nonetheless, I guess we are guarding our rights under the contracts, advising the owners about potential impacts, giving the multi-year contracts that we are working on, and those that are in process of defining contract terms in those new models of collaborative basis, like the progressive design, ensuring that we get the right contract amendment before we achieve any target price negotiation.
Kim, your experience so far?
Yeah, high level, I would say, the three words are uncertainty, ambiguity, and confusion kind of across the board. So from a material cost, we're hearing all of the steel, aluminum, and we're hearing those indirect conversations about what this actually looks like, how it gets applied, how it's affecting our supply chain. We don't do a lot of direct purchase, but we're definitely talking about that just kind of as a post-COVID takeaway. So what does that look like, and how are we having these conversations with any potential suppliers across the border? There's definitely a lot of questions now on risk ownership and how do we assign and track that risk? That again was something that kind of came out of a COVID takeaway, but now we're kind of doubling down on that to say, you know, how are we tying these calculations to various different indices so that the ownership of that risk is assigned, usually back to the owner, but is assigned to the responsible party or the most, you know, fairly allocated responsible party. And we're hearing a lot of focus on, or increased conversation on payment timelines, and how do we stay ahead of that, get ahead of that, making sure that the money is flowing as quickly as possible, and which is again always part of the conversation, but I feel like it's a more heightened focus at this point in time for sure.
Certainly a turbulent time. I'm just getting hit like with all this after COVID and the supply chain issues we've been facing in the last few years.
Yeah.
No rest for the weary. Scott, you've got members across the board, so seeing it from all different angles.
Yeah, and as an industry association, one of the things that we try to do is pull together from across the membership so that we can represent publicly in discussions with government just what's actually happening in the industry. So when we're talking to members about that are building low rise and say, so the import tariffs on lumber, particularly when products are going back and forth in various stages of manufacturing, what's the impact? You know, we're hearing anything from like 20 to 40% impacts just on costs alone. And when we say, okay, let's translate that down into the impact to a potential home buyer and what that means on the cost of what that price tag looks like, you know, we're seeing anything from 15 to 20,000 being added to the cost of that, where it's a low rise relying on lumber. When we're looking at other just general building materials that are going into the construction cost itself, it could be anywhere from 5 to 30%, depending on how many times it might have to cross the border, what kind of other sourcing they're able to do. You know, that's another, you know, anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 on top of a house. The point that, you know, members keep emphasizing to me is we're already in the middle of a housing crisis. Builders, as Kim mentioned before, like they rely on certainty in markets to be able to move forward on these very risky projects. There's financing involved. There's risk exposure to these builders. So they're looking at what they can do, what they can feel that they can rely on. So crisis in changes in government policy, bad enough. You add tariffs on top of that. Builders are just sitting there and thinking, like, am I ready to move forward? Can I absorb these costs? But more importantly, at the cost that I need to build it, can consumers afford to buy it? And that's also really affecting their decision making. So as has already been mentioned, it's, you know, when you just have no clue. You wake up every morning and you hear something new, a new announcement on what this number is. At some point, you just put the pen down and stop doing the calculations, because, you know, tomorrow's going to be different.
For sure. And that, you know, that raises the big question. Are you seeing projects being paused or even absolutely canceled? I know it's a rough market for condo residential, was before, and this is almost a final stake, maybe, and not final, hopefully, but are you all seeing projects actually being paused or stopped or canceled altogether? Kim, what are you seeing on that front?
We're definitely taking a bit of a breath as it relates to our mixed use or our residential platform, with no real kind of defined view on when we're going to come out of this. Not specifically related to tariffs. Obviously, this was an economic conversation that happened. But to your point, the tariffs definitely aren't helping it, and is really kind of pushing that narrative. We're, you know, as part of this whole conversation about, you know, how do the numbers work and how are we pricing in this uncertainty, we obviously have to go back and talk about what do we do for alternates, right? Like top to bottom. Are we looking at just like contract execution, and how are we tying in these price escalation? Again, that kind of risk ownership conversation. You had mentioned it in the preamble, looking at the force majeure clauses and kind of expanding that out as kind of an easy one. The kind of contingency allowances and what are we baking in based on what we know today, which again could change tomorrow. Having some of these conversations earlier in the process, whether it's directly related to procurement, what we found, and some of these are easy conversations, right? Do we want to swap out some aluminum panel? Do we want to change, where we're buying our equipment from? Those are kind of off the top. Some of them more directly related to our retail portfolio and commercial construction side was what kind of steel members are we designing into the fabrication of the building? Because the different steel manufacturers are, fabricating different members on this side of the border versus that side of the border. So are we tweaking the design at the front end so that we don't have to buy the steel from the US supplier? So things like that we just took for granted before, right? It's some interesting conversations.
Scott, you must be hearing about projects all over the place that are slowing down, being slow walked, paused, or canceled.
Yeah, if this was a strong housing market as we saw like 4 or 5 years ago, I would probably be describing the impact of tariffs as being, it's having an effect, but it's not shutting everything down. But as I said earlier, like we're in the middle of a crisis. Houses are not being sold. Like our house sales, new home sales this year, so the first 4 months of 2025 compared to last year, is 50% down. But like that across the Ontario market is significant. We've gone from building, almost 50,000 sales in the GTA alone. We're now looking, it's measured in 2,000, 3,000 homes being sold. These drops are just significant. So what that means for builders is they're looking at, well, what kind of project should I be proceeding on right now? Well, anything that's in the entry level housing, so single family townhomes that are under 700,000, nothing's moving. Nothing is being built. Those applications are not being put forward. There's pockets in the province where that might be happening, but it's very, very rare. Low to mid-rise, moderately vulnerable in terms of a slowdown. So this is your 4 to 6 stories, stacked towns, things like that. Some of those are proceeding because they still see a market in that, and then trying to bake, as Kim mentioned, baking that into the price. But custom homes and high-end builds right now are currently the least vulnerable of all of those. So those custom high-end homes still proceeding, but builders are really clear when I'm talking to them about it that this is only for a period of time. This is not sustainable. At some point, if these tariffs keep continuing on for another year or two, all of that will start slowing down as well. So quick answer to the question, yeah, there's a lot of stuff being pulled off the drawing board right now. Again, they're just pausing on it. They've been sitting on land for a while. They're going to continue to sit on that land and not proceed. The other thing that municipalities are a little frustrated about right now is they're seeing, but we issued your building permit, you're not putting a shovel in the ground to start building. It's like, yeah, because all of those market conditions that when we put in this application, say sometimes 3, 4, 5 years ago, this has completely changed. So on that front, the data doesn't even suggest that it's moving forward.
And Daniel, your work is largely in the infrastructure space, which is a different species all on its own. Scott said, if owners have been sitting on the land, they're happy to sit on the land until the returns look favorable and then proceed. But you're on projects that are a public need and not a profit need, and so they're on a different structure and look at. What are you seeing?
No, totally. And I said in my previous answer, is early to say. I mean, these very large projects are quite complex in nature, and to understand a potential impact, and given that there is no clarity even on the origin of that impact, somehow then will take time. And I guess when these large projects are being delivered or procured based on existing budgetary allocations by the different entities, then at the end the projects continue moving forward. Then I haven't seen any impact. I've seen some assessments of potential impacts to understand what that is going to be eventually, but those are not necessarily factors to stop them or postpone them as of now. Then hopefully that remains like that once the government is able to settle an agreement and then get this back to history. But as of now, I haven't seen any impact on that sense.
Let me ask you about existing projects. Are you seeing fights start? I know I've seen on my end, I've seen lots of notices come out, beware, we're gonna, be impacted, and we're gonna at some point have a claim for price increases because of the tariffs. But are you seeing that actually coming out now, or is it just still early days for that too?
Early days, and as you said it's just notice here, notice there, like it happens early 2020. Everybody just putting out letters of notice to the owner saying, we don't know what it is, we don't know what is going to be the impact, but there is going to be an impact. Then hopefully the outcome of these governmental conversations are good enough to put that behind us, and eventually a very limited impact or none if those tariffs are resolved promptly. But no actual claims in place, because there is no real material events happening yet.
Kim, is that reflective of your experience as well, pretty much? Yeah.
Yeah, same thing. It was the notices came in fast and furious, but I like some of what Daniel's saying in terms of where we should be pressing for some of this kind of support, either, from the government or across industries on, what is the next step for this? Yes, there's going to be impacts. Yes, we are going to, see either some alternates or some changes, but where should we be pressing for some of these either tariff reliefs or exemptions, or definitely the infrastructure stimulus? And the more we hear about that, the better we're going to be. But what else do we need from the government to support some of this domestic manufacturing and making it easier and more cost effective for our industry to support the construction that needs to happen?
Yeah, and I want to come back to the government questions in a minute and bring John's view on that as well. And just on the notices that you're getting, I think it's important to flag for people that there's no automatic right to a price increase. Unless your contract says you get it. Your contract will dictate everything on this, including the process for notices and what's required of a notice. And so it's really incumbent on everybody to look very closely at their contracts, what they say about price increases. I flagged some of those items to look out for in the slides earlier. And as I said, the slides and the whole presentation will be available online a few days after our program. Are you seeing any negotiation of new contracts where people are pumping in new terms and sort of outlining how that would work, or that they should be entitled to it? I know, Daniel, your big infrastructure contracts, have a robust provision to deal with this type of change in law or change in taxes. And so that's pretty standardized with the big infrastructure contracts. But are you seeing any attempts to revise that, or Kim, are you seeing any new language that's coming forward to help guide people through these contracts?
Yeah, we haven't finalized any of our contracts. It's definitely part of the conversation. And it's, I think part of it is more because there is that uncertainty. Nobody really knows where we're going to land. We're in the middle of this 30-day kind of negotiation period. What's going to be the outcome of that? So it's more of nobody really wants to kind of finalize the numbers until we know where we stand, or if we need to get ahead of it from a timing perspective, what clauses are we going to put in to assign that risk appropriately?
Daniel, you seeing anything in the big contracts? Any new language? Everybody?
Yeah. We have ongoing some contract negotiation where we've seen some new wording specifically covering U.S. tariffs impacts. of course, you mentioned other contracts. They have already some provisions, not as straightforward as we would like. Changing law is right the first attempt, but I mean it is not that totally clear though. Then if going back to some kind of lobbying type of requests, I think would be to have a very supportive approach from the government agencies if this issue becomes a real issue, and with claims as outcomes, and having that consideration when and if we reach that point.
That ties into a question that was asked about pushback from companies who don't want to show the price increase and how the tariffs impact. I think, again, you'll have to look at your contract. The contract will dictate what you're entitled to. It probably does not address it in any clearest way that we would all like, including what kind of proof do you have to give for a change. And so it will be just, I would treat it like how the contract says, but also how you've treated every change. Any increase or request for a delay or a price increase requires some verification. What is the proof that there was a price increase? Does the contract entitle them to a price increase in the first place? And if it does, how do you prove that? And you'll have to work that out with the contracting parties who are claiming it. And ultimately, as with everything, if you can't work it out, we've got lots of good disputes lawyers who can help you out with that. But hopefully the industry comes together, because it is a bit of a crisis moment for everybody. We're all in this together, trying to figure our way through. And if I can segue on that, trying to figure our way through it with hopefully some support and guidance from the government itself. So with that, we'll come back to the question that Kim raised a few minutes ago, and maybe flip to John and Scott. What are you seeing in terms of government responses to the tariff on the ground help in any kind of meaningful impact on projects? John, do you want to start, and then we'll kick it over to Scott?
Yeah, I'll start. I'll so that we have a good flow here. So Scott, I know obviously there's a lot of advocacy on very deep housing. I'll say just from for the audience and how governments really think about this. I worked for Minister Flaherty back in the 2008 financial crisis, and it's really just like, okay, what's our bang for our buck? So we always have this big chart, right? And it would always say, if I spend this much money of government dollars, I would have a stimulus impact on this sector that would go 2.3 or 1.5, right? And if you look at what's happening on tariffs, is that, as we've mentioned, everyone's in this together, everyone's being impacted. Who is getting impacted most? There you go. You got to ask that question, because it's not just construction. It's not just this sector. Not every sector across this country is going, hey, I got my hand up. I'm getting impacted. So then the government has to go and start juggling and go, okay, so well, they're impacted. But then if they're impacted, can I actually make change to that, right? So one of the things we hear from government as it relates to the construction sector directly from different folks is who make decisions is, okay, so will it get houses built? Will it actually move anybody to do something? And it's a tough question, right? Because, and sometimes I go back to saying, well, you also just need to get ready for when the market comes back, because it will. A lot of this is consumer confidence, I think, because there's a level of, everyone talks about, uncertainty on the business side, but the reason why people also aren't buying, even with rates maybe going down, is because they're uncertain as to the economy and the tariffs. And so there's that whole element there. But the market will come back at some point, because there is still a housing crisis. So therefore, you need the infrastructure in place to build, especially a high rise. It doesn't happen overnight. You need to have the energy infrastructure. You need to have the wastewater, the water there, so that when they're ready to go and the market's ready to go, they can go. And so that, I know there's been a lot of talk on, I know Carney Modular, obviously, and then, also in the Ontario government and the tax side, because government is a lot of the cost of a house. So I'll turn that over to Scott, I'm sure, who can go into more detail on that front.
Sure. Thanks, John. So obviously we've been lobbying government for a long, long time on how to make the environment much more conducive to wanting to build, making it so that builders can get financing that they need for these large projects. The issue that we have was to try and, parse out what the impacts of tariffs are and what the relief should be specifically to tariffs. It just gets sucked right back in again to the whole conversation about what does government need to do to get us out of the housing crisis. This is the same Ontario government that said, hey, well, let's build 1.5 million new homes by 2031. And then they had policy changes that appeared to have the opposite impact of getting that towards, or getting builders to be able to get to 1.5 million homes by 2031. So when we look at the impacts of tariffs just being piled on top of things, one of the biggest things that we are advocating both federally and provincially that they could do is some GST and HST relief. So when we dive into that in the conversations with government, we continue to press during the federal election on the importance of GST relief from the federal side. We were not as enthusiastic when the Liberal government or Liberal Party came out and said they would do it up to $1 million, but only for new home buyers. More encouraged when the Conservative government said that they would do it up to 1.3, 1.4 million, but they would do it for all home buyers. So that was the direction of the stimulus that we needed. So then when the Liberal government coming in signaled that was still going to be for just for first-time home buyers, we did a little bit of a dive into the data, going through CRA data on home sales and income, and we found that was going to impact about 5% of the sales in Ontario. Like, it was not even going to move the needle. So we pushed really hard. They rise tomorrow. So unless a miracle happens in the next day, I don't expect anything to change on that front. But here's where we are a lot more encouraged right now. The Ontario government has signaled very clearly. Doug Ford likes to make policy in media statements and at events. And we're kind of, sometimes grateful for that. It makes the bureaucrats scramble to get some data out there for us to try and analyze. But the Ontario government, if they move forward on their 8% 8% portion of the HST, that would have a significant impact in Ontario if they were to relieve that, anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 per home. You put that out to all home buyers, which is what they're also considering, and they have just kind of indicated publicly. That pushes it up to $90,000 to $100,000 per home. So you think about a $750,000 home somewhere, outside of the GTA, that's a decent sized home in a strong, vibrant community, and all of a sudden that home becomes $650,000. That opens up that opportunity for a lot of home buyers, whether new or repeat home buyers, that will allow them to qualify for that mortgage where they otherwise may not have been able to at $750,000. So we're trying to show what the benefits are. And I like the way John framed it, in that if a government's going to put money into a program like this $1 billion it would cost the province to do that, which makes Minister Bethlenfalvy lose sleep at night, but Premier Ford and Minister Flack thinking, hey, this is exactly what we need to do, that would stimulate a lot more homes being built. But what if we put $1 billion into this? What do we get for it? And I argued as recent as yesterday with some meetings with government as to, let's figure out what that multiplier effect is, because I know it's bigger than 1.1 to 1. So what is that? Is it 1 to 2, 1 to 3? Like, how much is that? And having spent time also working for Minister Flaherty here in Ontario when he was finance minister and Minister Eads before him, that was always the question put to me as well. It's like, if we're going to divert this much money into something, what do we get for it? And how does it make the economy and the people of Ontario better? Our very, very loud voice to government right now is this GST, HST reform of eliminating that off the cost of a new home sale will move the needle significantly. So that's what we're continuing to echo to them.
Well, in between that and the development charges, like, that's critical, right? And again, like, back to the confusion and uncertainty, we're seeing a disconnect between what they're doing and what they're saying. Right? Like, I know, shocking, but we hear this, more homes faster, and these different acts and policies, and it's all great that we're saying all the right things, but we have one of our condo developments right now that we've been issued, and I don't want to make this a political conversation, but we've been issued 2 stop work orders We were delayed by probably a year on our permit submission. It's
Yep.
just delay after delay where the inspectors are coming out and, telling us that, there's different problems with their internal reviews and moving the permits along and getting our approvals in place. And we're sitting there the whole time saying we're trying to do exactly what everybody is saying is the problem right now. And we're not getting the support to help us do that. And this is a project that's under construction. It's not lines on a page. We're actually building it. And it's just roadblock after roadblock. So it becomes very frustrating from the owner's perspective when we're hearing all this commentary and we're trying to do what everybody says we need to do, and we're just not getting there, right?
There is some optimism, I think, that has been presented in the last few weeks with the passage of Bill 17. You mentioned development charges.
Yep.
Kim, we did such a deep dive into this, and we were so happy to see so much of what OHBA was recommending reflected into Bill 17 around development charges. Like just taking the payment of a development charge, you take average amount of time from start to finish of a project when builders and owners are having to do the financing on that. Just that one provision in Bill 17 of moving the payment of the development charge from the time the building permit is issued, which is the way it is now, to the time of occupancy, which sometimes can be 3, 4, 5, 10 years of when that's being done. We did some really rough numbers, but just the average impact and savings of that alone, that one provision in Bill 17, by making it payable once the person or once the home buyer's in the unit, is $30,000 off the price of a home. Like that's a real number, and the government could not ignore the impact and significance of that. So we saw some success there. But it's still a ways out. We still got to consult on all the regs. They've got to put those in place in the fall. But for projects like what Kim just described, we're hoping that that's a thing of the past and not a thing of the future. But the real fix for what she just described, in addition to the costs, is getting municipalities in line and getting their approvals processes streamlined and the same. When RioCan's building in one community, it shouldn't have to have a whole different process for an application to go through and inspections in a different municipality. Why would it? So it just no longer makes sense. And finally, we've got the ear of the government that they seem to understand that this can't continue.
It's interesting. What I'm hearing is we've had all these blocks or additional costs or barriers to successful projects, and the tariffs have been a catalyst for turning around and looking at ways to solve those problems. And that's what I'm hearing. Obviously, Scott, you speak specifically to Ontario. Kim and Daniel, you're across I'm hearing similar things across the whole country on that. What I'm not hearing is anybody talking about what was talked about during the campaign about taking all the tariffs we're collecting and pouring it back in some sort of direct way into construction industry or whoever was actually impacted by tariffs. I mean, certainly on the one hand, anytime you have a little bit of a troubled market, government's quick to come out with infrastructure projects, and that's one way to get the money back in. But are you seeing anything on that front? Are you hearing anything about actual plans to take the tariff money that we collect and putting it back into support the people who are hurt the most by it, the tariffs?
I'll start just because I think it's important to note kind of some of the practical realities of Government of Canada budgeting, and same thing in the Government of Ontario, really. Well, one, just on your point on when the market is bad is when you get resolutions to problems, right? Because as much as the industry could say, hey, we got a lot of problems when the market is good, it glosses over so much, and they say, well, stuff's getting built, so don't worry about it, we'll just keep going as we're going. Right now it's not, and it's like, okay, now we actually have a problem we have to deal with, which is a perfect time to act on a lot of these challenges from a government relations angle. As it relates to tariff money, I mean, it's unclear quite like how much they're actually going to get from their tariff revenues. But any revenue, no matter what type of revenue in the Government of Canada, goes to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, and it's just a big pot of money. Doesn't, like, you can say, I'm going to portion out this piece of the CRF into this. And we did this actually as a government when I was in government once, and all the bureaucrats laughed at us and said, well, that's just dumb. So it's good politics, but it's just dumb. It's all the CRF, who cares? So what you're going to find is Carney waited on the budget, which was an interesting challenge, and there's a lot of reasons why. But I expect that there will be some action in the budget in the fall from a federal government perspective, but constrained because obviously the budgetary situation in Canada isn't as strong as it could be coming out of COVID. And then in Ontario, you have obviously Premier Ford making money announcements, including what Scott was just talking about. So there is movement, and I think that that movement won't be necessarily have to be attached to tariff revenue, but it'll just be attached to, you know, that age-old word that nobody really understood in 2008-9 crisis, stimulus, which is the watchword since then.
Right, right. So I see we've got another question or two here. Lots of political talk about speeding up approvals in Ottawa. How do you get bureaucrats to embrace enhanced collaboration and improved efficiency approval timelines when their whole future career prospects depend entirely on not understanding it? I don't know how serious or tongue-in-cheek or sarcastic that or bitter experience is driving that question.
Yeah, if you talk to a government bureaucrat, and my wife is actually a government bureaucrat, enhanced collaboration and improved efficiency is what they would say is a contradiction in terms, in their opinion, right? If I have to consult so far, that takes me, you know, if you go through the gazetting process, for example, that takes you 90 days at minimum, most likely more, to go through all the gazetting process. That's the collaboration part, right? So there's this balance between doing something, consulting on something, and moving forward. So there's a quid pro quo there.
And certainly on the collaboration side, and Daniel, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of this on the big projects, but I see it percolating down to smaller and more urban development projects. People just need to get along, and the best way to ensure success for everybody is that the project succeeds. You want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing on collaboration and how that might be, just like we're tearing down provincial barriers, we're tearing down barriers between trades and owners and engineers and so on.
Totally. We are in a forking time. I mean, still some legacy projects from the fixed price P3 lump sum type of projects in large infrastructure projects, but not anymore. All new procurement processes are based on the new framework of collaborative contracts. Could be an alliance contract where all parties, including the owner, the contractor, the designer, are joint and several responsible for the outcomes. Then could be a next step that is what is called the progressive design, that we work all together through a development phase where design, risk, schedule, estimate, cost is developed together to reach a target price, and that target price comes with a pain gain mechanism there to share savings or overruns. Being said that, has to be a change in mindset on the public servants, on the contractor side, because we are coming from decades of very confrontational approach. Then it's been a challenge. There are already some good outcomes, but still to come, I guess, is early in that process of those collaborative contracts to make it work properly, and the framework is maturing during this learning curve on many aspects. But I can tell you, we are already over a year involving one of them, the Ontario Line Elevated Guideway, where we've seen a lot of great collaboration, integration with the contracting authority. We are engaging in two other more. I mean, you said it. It's kind of a spreading, not geographically speaking, in other jurisdictions, and is spreading in other smaller type of contracts, and then which makes sense. I mean, we've seen that in other more mature regions like the UK, Australia, with 10, 15, 20 years of experience in this type of models. We are developing our own to a certain extent, and I hope it's successful and addressing this type of volatile situations that are happening time to time.
Yeah.
But there's definitely this notion of collaboration. That's the buzzword post-COVID. This is what, back to office, this is enhanced collaboration. That's what we're also focused on. But then there's this piece of mutual respect, and or everybody just needs to stay in their own lane. As an owner, we spend millions of dollars on architects and engineers and specialty consultants and all these people that are professionals in their industry and leaders in their field that are designing these buildings. And there's a lot of oversight and review that goes into years of approval processes that, again, these people have stamps and licenses and industry associations that oversee the work that they do. How are we questioning them, not even through the drawing review process, but right up until through completion in occupancy inspections? And like, how are we, kind of tasking this all with this subject to interpretation on the Ontario Building Code? And that's your takeaway as to why you could potentially have millions of dollars of added expense come in at the 11th hour in a project. It's a very disjointed and dysfunctional process.
And
I think you hit the head right, or hit it right on the head there, in terms of we have 444 municipalities. So we have at least 444 different types of processes and interpretations of code and other types of legislation. So the signal coming out of Bill 17 that the government wants to standardize that process, give builders more certainty, remove the processes from the system that really don't add value. Like, for example, one builder in Oxford pulled me aside to tell me the story about how the municipality there was asking him for a flood risk report where he was building was on the top of a hill. So the fact that they were worried about it flooding was just a completely useless exercise and cost to do that. Because to Ken's point, every time you're asked to do something, it costs you to do that. Sometimes it's $5,000, sometimes it's $100,000 to be able to do some of these reports that are being asked for, and it's just not adding any value. The other thing is that we just have never had any real true provincial oversight on municipalities with respect to these processes. It's just been allowed to go in all directions for way too long. So bringing them into some type of standardized process where there's a common system that everybody can see the same data, theoretically you should reach the same result. But at the end of the day, this really is about, it's been allowed to go on too long in secret. Nobody really understands how this has evolved because they don't tend to share it. The best solution here is you got to shine a light on it. You got to make it transparent. And then all of a sudden it miraculously starts to correct itself when you're being compared to other municipalities side by side on how well you're doing.
And all of which is to reinforce why I love having these forums and having people like yourselves join us and give us your insights, your real life experiences dealing with these kinds of issues on the desk in real life with real impacts. So I'm going to wrap up our conversation now and thank very much our panelists, Kim Valliere from RioCan, Daniel Botero from Amico, and Scott Anderson from the Ontario Home Builders Association. Great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us and contributing to the dialogue that we are in need of and continues, because it's a complex industry and there's always new issues and we're constantly having to re-examine, especially these days after COVID, after supply chain, inflation, now tariffs. And when the US becomes our 13th province, we'll have all that to deal with as well. So thank you very much, all of you. We're going to wrap up now, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. We do have a survey. We are always aiming, these are meant to really provide some practical information and assistance to the industry, to all of you for in these few moments that we have together. So we really encourage you to scan the QR code that's on the screen now. give us your input. Be frank. Tell us things that you want to hear about, because this is not just for us to talk about us, but to really provide some insight and keep the dialogue going on solutions and practical ways of dealing with these common problems that we all have. As always, as I mentioned earlier, the forum is recorded. And in the next few days, we will be posting the forum on our website. Everybody who registered and participated in today's presentations will get an email with a link. So look out for that. And again, please fill out the survey if you could. Thank you all for joining us. Finally, please ensure you're signed up for our distribution list. Shannon posted the link to sign up for our building brief. These are short, quick, practical articles that we put out periodically, fairly regularly, on topics of the day, trends and current responses to case law or changes in law, like Bill 17 or Bill 5 or what have you, Construction Act amendments, and of course any trends that are hitting us and impacting our construction projects. We also advertise through that distribution list on upcoming events, including our fall construction law forum, which we don't have a date yet, but we're looking at November, and we're likely to spend a fair bit of time talking about a number of legislative updates, the ones that I mentioned earlier, prompt payment that are coming across the country still and being updated and amended, including in Ontario, the holdback regime, which I think will become quite popular across the country. And we're also looking at having a discussion about AI and how that's impacting construction already, and the really meaningful, impactful ways that artificial intelligence is going to really change a lot about the way we run our projects. So with that, thank you. Have a great summer, and we'll see you in the fall. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.